What is going on, guys? Jason Burke here, Styles Clash for Life, coming at you on YouTube, and today I've got some football focus. Now that the Pittsburgh Steelers' height of free agency has ended, and the NFL draft has ended, and the undrafted free agents were brought in, we kind of have a much better picture now of who the Steelers have on their roster. So what I want to do for the next couple of weeks, at least once a week, is bring you guys a bit of a current roster breakdown and see if we addressed some of the big positional problems we had last season and coming into this new season. Pittsburgh had a few big areas of need, and I think one of the biggest was offensive line. 2 years ago, we had a very, very struggling bottom of the league offensive line, one of the worst, running games and pass protection games in the league, and it was definitely taking away from what previous Steeler football was. Last season, we started off quite bad again, and then really improved by the end of the year, partially, I think, due to the fact that our offensive line stayed entirely healthy all year. Every lineman, all five, started every game this season, and when they were injured, they only missed a few plays here and there. So the starting five remained entirely healthy and intact, which eventually, toward the end of the season, as the offensive coordinator opened up, Matt Canada gave Kenny Pickett more leeway. Pickett started to improve, which meant the running game wasn't getting keyed up on, so the running game started to improve. So the offensive line looked pretty solid kind of by the end of the year, but still was one of the weaker groups, I think, for us. And overall in the league, it was probably our lowest positional problem. So I wanted to start off the post-draft, post-free agency height positional breakdown by looking at the offensive line and seeing, did we improve this positional group piece by piece? So looking at the O-line right now, and I'm not going to include some of the undrafted free agents and some of the kind of random camp names because they're just bodies. No offense to those guys, but the chances of those guys making the roster are very, very slim. But we do currently have, I believe, 10 offensive linemen on the roster based on last season, people we re-signed, the draft, and stuff like that. So we have 10 names on this roster. You got to think about 8 guys are going to be on the roster, but let's take a look at it. Offensive tackle, currently I have 3 main guys, Broderick Jones, Chuks Okorafor, and Dan Moore. The biggest addition obviously was trading up 3 spots in the draft to pick 14 to get the Georgia standout Broderick Jones at tackle. And then we have Chuks and Dan Moore, who were the 2 starters last year. So to ask yourself the question, did the Steelers improve a tackle? Exponentially. I think bringing in Broderick Jones, he's the most physically impressive and highest upside tackle in the entire draft. He was the number 2 overall tackle for me behind Paris Johnson, but I think physically he's got a higher ceiling. He is a big, tall, massive, athletic guy who can push guys off their blocks and who can do a lot of things in motion, like pulling out, getting out wide to block downfield. He's a good pass blocker. He's a good run blocker. I think he's going to be a big addition, and obviously I think he's going to be a day 1 starter along with Chuks. I think Chuks and Broderick are our starters, and you guys know I'm not a gigantic Chuks fan, but it's the last year of his contract, and he did have his best season last year. So I think Broderick Jones starts over Dan Moore on day 1. And right away, that's a big, big improvement because Dan Moore had a pretty weak year last year. I think he was our weakest out of our 5 linemen and one of the most penalized guys in the league, I think, at tackle last year. So upgrading Broderick Jones over Dan Moore is great, and Dan Moore can still be the 3rd tackle. So if somebody gets hurt, you still have a guy that's had 2 years of starting experience on the bench. So that's a positive as well. Dan Moore being the 3rd tackle is an upgrade over whoever our 3rd tackle was last year. Then you look at center, you've got Mason Cole as your main guy, and then looking at possible backups, we have guys like Nate Herbig, who was brought in, and I'll talk more about Nate Herbig when I go to the guard section, but obviously Mason Cole was signed last year as a big upgrade at center, had a pretty solid year last year. I think he was probably our 2nd best lineman last year at center, and Nate Herbig, who was brought in from Philadelphia as a guard, has also had starting center experience, so you've got a 2-way player there as a versatile backup who has positional flexibility, which Mike Tomlin loves, as our backup center. So you've got a good starting center coming back this year and a upgrade at the backup center position since J.C. Asenauer was not re-signed. So this one's a push. I wouldn't say major upgrade, but I do like Mason Cole. I'm glad he's back, and I do like having Herbig as our number 2 there. So I'd say that's an improvement. Guard, we got several guys. This is our deepest spot. We have James Daniels, Isaac Seumalo, Nate Herbig, Kevin Dotson, Kendrick Green and Spencer Anderson. I didn't know where to put Spencer Anderson because he's literally played all 5 spots at Maryland. Looking at these guys, James Daniels obviously was our biggest signing from last year's free agency. I think he was our best lineman last year. He was a great signing for us. I'm glad he's back. I think he's still one of our best linemen. Isaac Seumalo was one of our biggest signings of this year's free agency class, adding to the guard spot from Philadelphia with Andy Weidel, the assistant GM, bringing him over. He is one of our biggest names in free agency. He's a very good blocking guard. Nate Herbig is another Philadelphia Eagle, brought over by Andy Weidel, who used to coach for the Eagles. Then you have Kevin Dotson, who was our starter last year. And right away you look and say, our starter last year, who had probably his weakest season last year, but he's now the 4th guy on the depth chart here. He goes from 2 to 4, which means we added several good pieces. Kendrick Green, who's a former starting center / starting guard, and Spencer Anderson, who, like I said, he was drafted in the 7th round. He's a guy that has no clear position, but he was literally a guy that played at both guard, both tackle, and center spots at different times at Maryland. So positional flexibility out the wazoo for this guy. So we have 6 different guys here. Obviously, the starters are Daniels, who was last season signing, Seumalo, who was this season signing. These are our 2 starting guards, obviously. And I think Nate Herbig is an obvious guy on the roster. They call him Nasty Nate because he's a really physical guy, which I like a lot. Good hands. He can play at guard or center, so we like him here to be our main backup, kind of what Hassenauer has been for us in the past couple of years. So yeah, just with Seumalo alone starting over Kevin Dotson, that is a big upgrade in my opinion. So now you've got a fresh tackle and a fresh guard that you think are going to be high upside starters. So this line is improved drastically on 2 of its 5 spots. And now all of a sudden you have guys that started last year as your top backups now. You know, you bring in Herbig to back you up in 2 different spots. And you have Dan Moore and Kevin Dotson as your backup guys on the bench. I think you fortified your starters and your bench now. And obviously there are 10 guys here, and only about 8 guys are going to be signed for sure. You usually sign your starting guys and then 1 guy for each spot. So you'll have your 2 starting tackles plus 1 bench tackle, your 2 starting guards plus 1 bench guard, and your starting center plus 1 bench center. So you're going to have at least 8 guys on the roster. So obviously Broderick, Chooks, Moore, Daniels, Seumalo, Herbig, those are your guarantees. Kevin Dotson, if he stays, is a guaranteed guy on this roster. He's a nice piece to have. He had one really good year when he first came in and then hasn't played the same way since. But there's a good chance he gets traded for like a 4th round or 5th round pick for next year. I could see him going and starting somewhere else. He is a lot better, in my opinion, than Dan Moore, and he has a higher upside. So I think if we trade anybody, it's going to be Kevin Dotson. With obviously the other guys, staying here. Kendrick Green, I think, is obviously cut at the end of preseason, as he should be. He's been terrible for us, and I think Spencer Anderson, in spite of the fact that he has flexibility, will not be on this team come the 53-man roster. So looking at our starters, again, tackles are Broderick and Chooks, center is Mason Cole, guards are Daniels and Seumalo. You've got Seumalo, who's a very underrated starting guard, and you've got Broderick Jones, who is one of the most physically impressive tackles that I've seen in several years. So this line has gotten way better. You've got a better bench now, you've got a more experienced bench now, and you've still got Dotson, who you can keep as a really good bench player as your first off your bench, or you could trade him to get draft capital 4th or 5th round for next year to continue drafting guys. So I like this line a lot better at this point this year than I did last year. I think it's drastically improved. Good free agency, good draft, much better depth. I like where we are. What do you guys think? Who do you guys think surprises us? Does Spencer Anderson find a way to make the team? Does Kendrick Green somehow not get cut? And what do you do with Kevin Dotson? Does he wind up being on your bench, or does he get traded for draft capital? Tell me in the comments down below. And if you like these deep dives, please keep returning to the channel. Like, share, and subscribe. Comment on these videos and tell me what you think I should review next. I'll be talking about corners pretty soon. I'll be talking about guys we didn't draft and stuff we still need to look at, like the linebacker spots, pretty soon as well. So I'll see you guys soon.